I'm not exaggerating when I say this could change the entire landscape we know about being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver forever. As you can see right away, Biden's Labor Department takes aim at Uber and DoorDash, so this includes not only rideshare driving, but delivery driving as well, with new rule aimed to cut down a number of quote-unquote independent contractors. First off, what's with this picture? Like, why are they trying to make Biden look so, like, BA? Like, I don't know. I feel like he has, like, a Tom Cruise look in this picture. I don't know. I think sometimes I see Biden, and he has that kind of, like, Top Gun-like look. I'm like, why is he trying to pull that off? I don't know. I mean, hey, he's trying to rock it. Anyway, let's move on. The Biden administration enacted a new labor rule. Let me pause this. It's going to be annoying with this ad. Okay, let me go back to this. Okay. Enacted a new labor rule Tuesday that aims to prevent the misclassification of workers as independent contractors, a step that could bolster both legal protections and compensation for millions in the U.S. workforce. Now, I will say I have done some videos, and I've mentioned it in some videos, of being an independent contractor versus an employee. I know it's a heavily debated topic. Some people, a lot of drivers actually, want to stay as independent contractors. A lot of drivers want to move and becoming employees. Regardless of what side of the argument you're on, being an independent contractor or an employee, there's no denying it. Regardless, drivers get taken advantage of by Lyft and Uber consistently, and all my delivery drivers out there as well. DoorDash drivers, Grubhub drivers, etc., get taken advantage of immensely by Uber and Lyft and all these companies. I mean, there's a reason why this huge lawsuit happened in New York, for example, like I've mentioned in a bunch of other videos. And I said in a bunch of videos, is there something that could potentially happen on a federal level? And it's starting to happen, right? As you can see right here, the major app-based platforms expressed confidence that the new rule would not force them to reclassify their gig drivers. And I gotta be honest, I don't think it's a matter of reclassification as just treating your workers better, right? Business groups warn the rule creates uncertainty for employers. That's kind of BS in my opinion, because whatever. And much depends upon how the Labor Department decides to enforce it. So it could be like a tomato-tomato situation where you're like, okay, it seems like a bit of a gray area, right? Going down here now, so let's get into the specifics. The Labor Department rule, which the administration proposed 15 months ago, replaces a Trump-era standard that narrowed the criteria for classifying employees as contractors. Such workers are not guaranteed minimum wages or benefits, such as healthcare coverage and paid sick days. Moving on, though, labor advocates have supported the rule, saying employers have exploited lax rules to misclassify workers and avoid properly compensating them. I agree with that. Personally, I do agree with that because of the kind of casual gray area rules, you have a spectrum where you're like, okay, you know what? It's kind of a gray area, but we're going to treat our employees better. However, for a lot of companies, especially looking at their bottom line and their profits, say, you know what? We're going to go the other way, and it's kind of a gray area. And because it's a bit of a spectrum, because it's a gray area, we're just going to go to the worst case scenario of that gray area or spectrum and say, screw it. We're just going to give our drivers way less money, take away their benefits, take away all these different things that they should be getting, right? In a report, the Economic Policy Institute said construction workers, truck drivers, cleaners, landscapers, security guards, and call center workers are among the most commonly misclassified workers. It estimated that misclassified construction workers, for example, lose between $10K and roughly about $16 to $17K per year. And I think that's probably up there when it comes to Lyft and Uber drivers, right? Same thing with delivery drivers. The rule, which will take effect on March 11th, so a couple months from the exact time of this video, directs employers to consider 6 criteria for determining whether a worker is an employee or contractor without predetermining whether one outweighs the other. That is a change from the Trump rule. So it seems like they're becoming more strict about this, where it's less of a gray area. You know, and obviously there's going to be pros and cons on both sides of this, right? It is tough to say because my perspective is, at least right now, I think moving drivers to being full employees, I don't think is a move, at least not right now. But I do think that drivers should get protection. I do think every driver should get access to health insurance, should get paid sick leave, you know, stuff like that. I think that drivers should not just be kind of hung out to dry if they do get sick, or things like being deactivated, like I mentioned before, or things like healthcare and health insurance. It's a very tricky landscape. You know, advocates say this new rule offers a more comprehensive approach to determining whether workers are truly in business for themselves. You know, it says that Acting Secretary of Labor said that misclassified workers sometimes work side by side with individuals who are probably classified doing the same work. I don't think this really is much of an issue when it comes to Uber and Lyft because you're kind of in the same category, right? Misclassified employees don't get paid for all of their hours. They've seen their economic security eroded because of misclassification, and I think this is true for rideshare drivers. Whether you want to be an employee or not, an issue that things like minimum hourly guarantees, like I mentioned in a bunch of other videos, those do exist in places like California and New York, but not everywhere else. Now talking about Uber and Lyft, because they're kind of giving you kind of synopsis of the situation. At the issue for ride-hailing, delivery, and other apps is a requirement that employers consider whether jobs performed by workers are an integral part of the company's business, which they are, right? The new rule takes direct aim at the practices of corporations like Uber and Lyft that have, quote-unquote, taken advantage of misclassifying workers to shrink accountability as employers, avoid paying their fair share, and game a system already rigged in their favor. I think this is the big kind of kicker. Granted, this is one person's perspective, but I think this is accurate, right? Uber and Lyft will use any trick and technique they can to kind of work around the system, to kind of game the system, because it's a bit of a gray area right now, in order to basically screw over their drivers and have the least accountability possible. This is 100% true, right? I mean, there's a reason why, like I said, drivers won the lawsuit against Uber and Lyft, and that New York fined them. I mean, it was like $328 million, which, to be honest, isn't that much for Uber and Lyft to pay. But they fined them being like, drivers should get way more protections. And here's what gets tricky. It's up to the employers to initially decide how to weigh each criteria, which also includes how much control the employer has over the worker, whether the work requires special skills. Being a driver, not really in my opinion, but it's debatable, right? The degree of permanence in the relationship between worker and employer, and the investment in a worker makes, such as car payments, right? And this is where it's interesting, talking about one person from Uber explained that the rule does not materially change the law under which we operate, and won't impact the classification of the over 1 million Americans who turn to Uber to make money flexibly. I think that's a bit, remember, Uber and Lyft in kind of statements like this I've seen will kind of say, and I want to word this in the right way, I think it's called the straw man argument, where you argue against something that somebody's not actually arguing. So a good example, like I talked about in a previous video, is there's more drivers than ever before, which is a bad thing. I think that's the last video I just posted about Lyft and Uber. The issue, though, is that Uber's argument is wait, there's more people taking Ubers than ever before. But it's okay, that's not the full truth. Yes, there's more people taking Ubers than ever before, but that's not the issue. The issue is that there's more drivers happening way bigger, like 10x, compared to 1x amount of new people taking Ubers. It's kind of like they're arguing against an argument that's not being placed, or they're kind of giving a very politician-like argument. That's what I feel like when it comes to this. That they're like, don't worry, it's not going to affect the people who want to make money in a flexible way. And I'm like, no, that's not the situation per se. That's part of it. That's not the situation. The situation is that people just want to have a minimum hourly guarantee. People want to make more money driving Lyft and Uber. People don't want to get taken advantage of. Don't want to worry about being declassified in a wrong way and you miss out on 1 to 2 weeks of work. They don't want to worry about things like health insurance and all these other protection elements, right? Things like paid sick leave, like I mentioned before, Lyft also said the new rule will not force the company to change its business model, while warning this new guidance creates additional complexities and ambiguities for companies and courts alike across the country. I disagree. Well, partly. I agree and disagree. I agree that it does maybe make things a little more tricky because it's now more specific, which could cause some issues. But I disagree in the sense that when it comes to the ambiguity and the negative aspect of the ambiguity lies with Uber and Lyft. As a driver, it's better because now drivers are saying, hey, with this new thing, with this new law, we might be able to attack Lyft and Uber with more of an argumentative viewpoint. We have a better foundational basis to back us up to say, hey, you're treating us like crap. Stop doing that because look at the new legislation, right? I think that's, if anything, a good thing. I know the companies, of course, remember, Uber and Lyft does not like stuff like this because the worse they can treat their drivers, the less money, typically, because it all comes down to the bottom line, the less money they can give their drivers, which equals more money in their pocket, right? That's what it really comes down to, Flex Association, a group that represents major app-based rideshare and delivery platforms, said it will seek to ensure implementation of this rule does not target workers who overwhelmingly turn to app-based platforms to earn supplemental income on their own terms. I don't know, it's tough. Look here, right? Like I mentioned before, the new rule comes at a time when more states are passing laws that guarantee a minimum wage and other benefits for app-based workers, including New York last year, right? Like I mentioned earlier in this video. And I think that's huge, right? And this was kind of tough, again, you're seeing different things, right? In terms of the challenging rule in court, Mark Friedman, and they spell Mark correctly, by the way. That's the way to go. Friedman said the new guidelines will make it difficult for companies to know whether they are giving enough importance to any of the six criteria. He said it would depend on how aggressively the Labor Department decides to implement the rule, but the structure is biased towards classifying workers as employees. And I want to stress, I don't think that that's the issue. I know they keep bringing that up, and I get it too to an extent, because you could say, well, is this the first breadcrumb that could lead, let's say, rideshare drivers to becoming employees, not independent contractors? How that affect the ridesharing landscape, it's really tough to say. It leaves employers in the dark about whether they made the right decision. The only time they can be confident is if they call worker and employee. So it's kind of like, which way do we want to go? And I do want to stress, the biggest thing is just getting the benefits that you deserve. Jessica Lumen said that during the briefing, the fine rule isn't intended to apply specifically to certain industries type of work. The department will focus on, quote unquote, the most vulnerable workers, particularly the ones that are being unfairly deprived of minimum wages and overtime pay, which in my opinion is rideshare drivers. There's a reason why when it comes to these kind of like independent contractor versus employee debates, I think Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and delivery drivers almost get brought up right away, right? There's a reason why, for example, when California, for example, passed AB 5 that helped kind of freelance workers and independent contractors, there was a whole unique clause called Prop 22 just for Uber and Lyft, right? As you can see here, the rule does not carry the same weight as laws passed by Congress or state legislators. Instead, it offers an interpretation of those who should qualify for protections under the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, it is tough to say what this means, but I do think whether you're for this or against it, it is a big deal. Now, I will say, one quote that I do love, even though it's bittersweet, is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So there might be really good intentions behind this law and everything, but how it actually gets implemented in practicality is tough to say. I think a good example of that is Prop 22 here in California. I've mentioned this numerous times because it really was a groundbreaking instance that happened. In case you didn't know, it was a debate of should drivers be independent contractors or employees, right? They stayed as independent contractors. Uber and Lyft spent tens of millions of dollars on marketing and ads to have people say, hey, keep them as independent contractors. And some clauses under that, which I think is good, is things like drivers not only, even though they're independent contractors now, and stay as independent contractors, drivers now have a minimum hourly guarantee. They get benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's good. But I talked to a lot of drivers who said, look, I'm not going to lie, after Prop 22, because drivers are staying as independent contractors, one kind of unforeseen result of that is the fact that although, yes, the intention was there to be good, we're giving drivers minimum hourly guarantees and everything, Uber and Lyft now, and I've heard a lot of drivers say this to me here in California, that Uber and Lyft is being worse as a result of Prop 22 because they're like, hey, drivers are still not independent contractors. It's in the law. That means Uber and Lyft can treat us worse because we're just independent contractors. It is tough to say what's going to happen. And New York, I've had some people comment on this channel that they're like, hey, this is a better thing for New York because I'm getting a higher, average minimum wage because of the minimum hourly guarantee. I have had some delivery drivers comment on this channel about that. So there are some good and bad things that happen with stuff like this, but it's going to be interesting because in March, that's going to be where things really kind of hit the fan. And I don't know if it's going to be a good or a bad way. I genuinely don't know. I think if anything, to be honest, my honest perspective is I think this is a good thing. I know that it is this kind of odd double-edged sword where the more that drivers could be potentially classified as employees could be bad for a lot of drivers. I know like the flexible schedule and everything is the biggest thing. Things get tricky if, let's say, drivers are classified as employees. But the double-edged sword with that is that the more that drivers could be classified as employees, the better protection they get. But the better protection they get, the more they could be classified as employees. And I think there has to be this kind of unique, very delicate balance and fine but very definite line where drivers are independent contractors with benefits, but not full-on employees. I think that's where the line getting crossed is where it's going to be very vague. Because, for example, in a perfect world, drivers, if you look at like this is like the line, independent contractors, employees, right? I think you want drivers to be treated almost as employees, like right up to the line, but not exactly crossing it. Where drivers get, like I said, minimum hourly guarantees, health insurance, maybe dental insurance, paid sick leave, maybe paid time off or PT. I don't know, right? I'm just giving you different examples. Drivers get more protection. If they get wrongfully deactivated, I think they should get compensated for that, right? So I think drivers should have employee-like aspects and benefits, but not full-on employees. And that's where the gray area gets resulted, as you can see from here, is like Uber and Lyft, and other people might say, whether it's Uber and Lyft or the drivers, if you look at like a versus situation, Uber and Lyft might say, shoot, well, we don't know because it's this gray area, right? Could we get in trouble as Uber and Lyft if drivers actually stay as independent contractors when they should be employees? And some drivers might say, hey, you know what? What if we do a class action lawsuit? Because let's be honest, we should be classified as employees. It is tough to say after this of what's going to happen. And like I said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. This might prove to be better for a lot of delivery drivers and a lot of rideshare drivers. It could also pave the way to be worse. But I gotta say, this might be arguably some of the biggest news to maybe happen with Lyft and Uber ever for drivers when it comes to the federal landscape of being an independent contractor or an employee. This could be massive. And then you pair this, like I said, with all the kind of negative stuff, if I have to be honest, about 2024. I've mentioned numerous videos, there being too many drivers on the road. I mean, that alone is a massive, massive issue. And if you have too many drivers on the road and no minimum hourly guarantees, no protection, it's way less worth it than ever before, maybe in history, and maybe less worth it ever before to ever be a rideshare driver compared to any other job out there, right? However, this could change that. This could be the thing, let's say federally it happens, and this could be the first breadcrumb. I did mention it in numerous videos that could this ever become a federal thing of minimum hourly guarantees and protections. This could be that first breadcrumb that maybe at some point they say, you know what? Okay, drivers are not employees. It's too grave an area. We don't know how to classify them. They're not employees, but they should get a minimum hourly guarantee. If that happens around the country, that alone would be super beneficial for every driver out there. That way you know that if you go out and you drive and you get no rides or one ride that's right down the street, and we all get those, right? At least you get $15 an hour. Is that the best? No, but at least you're getting something, and something's better than nothing, right? I don't know. I think this it's going to be very interesting to see, right? We're 2 months away from that until March 11th. But this is going to be game-changing for Uber and Lyft. Or it might not be, right? I think this was tough. Is it such a roll of the dice that this could pass and nothing really changes? Or it could pass, and because it's on that kind of gray area line of independent contractor and employee, that some states say, you know what? We could use this as an argumentative tool to push drivers to become employees or push drivers to get benefits. And I think that's good. Obviously, Uber and Lyft doesn't want that because the more benefits that drivers have, the worse it is for Lyft and Uber. And Uber and Lyft says, oh, this is going to increase the amount of X, Y, and Z. I still think that at the end of the day, looking at the pure accounting and pure math, it's still going to be better for everybody. I think it's a win-win. Look what happened in New York. And I gave this example that on average, on a $30 order on Uber Eats, for example, and this is super relevant for this video, on average, Uber Eats and like DoorDash, for example, are now tacking on an extra $2 fee. So if you spend $30, let's say on an order on Uber Eats, you now actually are spending $32. Now, yes, on Uber Eats and DoorDash, and again, this is very important, there's a breakdown of all the pricing. However, though, in case you didn't know, one big caveat of New York is that now, when it comes to delivery driving, you tip at the end, not in the beginning. Typically, if you think about it, when you order delivery, you always tip before it gets to you. Now it's the opposite. And here's a big situation with that, is if you get a $30 order, typically the order is $36. You pay a 20% tip, boom. $36 is what you pay. The driver gets a $6 tip. Makes sense, right? In this situation, though, let's say you don't tip. Well, you're spending $32. You're spending $4 less. You're spending less money. And let's say you don't tip at all. Yeah, maybe the driver doesn't get a tip, but at the end of the day, the driver is walking away with way more money because of this new minimum hourly guarantee. It's a win-win for everybody. The people ordering delivery spend less money, and the people delivering the food get more money. So I think it's a win for everybody. Now, when it comes to Lyft and Uber, I think people are used to, and I said this before in other videos, people are used to fluctuating prices. You're used to the fact that if you go on Lyft and Uber, it might cost you $10 to go from point A to point B, but it also could cost you $23. And you're just like, Ubers are expensive right now. You don't think anything of it. The second thing is it's not a price breakdown. So if, let's say, a minimum hourly guarantee was to result as of this new law, and every state kind of implemented this, and let's say Uber said, shoot, you know what? We're gonna now have to start tacking on a $2 fee per every ride because that's what we got to do in order to compensate for this kind of situation going on. I think people, I'm going to be honest, I don't think people would really notice. I know you're like, Mark, come on, people would notice, but a $2 difference, when you consider the fact that there's not a price breakdown compared to delivery driving, and the fact that Uber and Lyft naturally just fluctuate, I think it's one of those things that you open it, and this is what everybody does. Most people typically have both apps. So you pull up both, and you're like, all right, is Uber cheaper, is Lyft cheaper? And then you're like, all right, Lyft's cheaper. Oh, man, it's $17. It's usually $12. That's weird. Okay, let's order it. You don't really think, you don't think anything of it because you just order the Uber and Lyft, right? And so I think that something like that, again, I'm using that as an example, could contribute to us having a minimum hourly guarantee. Yeah, maybe they have to tack on a $2 extra fee. I think that'd be huge. Again, it is tough to say what's going to happen with this law, though, in March, though, right? I mean, I'm obviously talking about a bunch of different points here, but at the end of the day, like I've said in a lot of videos, especially in the last 6 months, most of my videos, I'd say 75% have been more negative towards Lyft and Uber, where there being too many drivers on the road. That's the biggest thing. Not enough new people taking Ubers, and I want to stress that point. I know Uber's argument is, there's more people taking Ubers than ever before, which is true, but that's not the full truth, right? There's, like, say, 10x new drivers on the road and only 1x new passengers, or 2x, for example, new passengers on the road. So, too many drivers on the road. Drivers are not making enough money. It's costing drivers more money, which is what I call bridging the gap, where it's getting more expensive because of inflation, and you're getting less money. Uber and Lyft's taking out a bigger cut than ever before when it comes to your earnings. And then you include this with all the fact of everything going on, just trying to make ends meet, and the tricky landscape that is being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, and the fact that, especially now, deactivation seems to be more possible and more probable. But Uber's, I know, fighting back against that, so I got to give Uber credit where credit's due. I will say it's never been a rockier landscape to be a rideshare driver, ever. It's never been this tricky. It's never been this kind of all over the place. And this is such a heavily debated topic. And I think the reason why is no matter what, whether you're for this or against it or whatever, at the end of the day, drivers are taking home way less money than ever before and have way less protections than ever before. And I think that with the popularity of Uber and Lyft, better or for worse, this is causing a lot of legislation and laws to start being put forward to protect rideshare drivers, or at least for something to change. And with big, heavy-hitting states like California and New York, if you look at the ride-sharing market and the ride-sharing world, with those two states already implementing some new laws, a lot of people maybe in the federal government are saying, okay, should this be a nationwide thing? And with something like this passing, I gotta be honest, it could be here's what's kind of tough, it could be game-changing for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and delivery drivers as well. It could also not be. It's kind of a roll of the dice. It's very interesting. It's very tough to say what's going to happen. But either way, I think that when March comes around and we actually see, or maybe March or April or May, right, when we see how this actually gets used in practicality, not just on paper. I've said this before, my favorite quote is, knowledge is knowing a tomato's a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. We'll have to see how this actually plays out in real time once it gets actually put forward in March 11th. Overall, though, I'm going to say this could be one of the most game-changing things to ever happen to the ride-sharing world.